Thanks for joining us for The Drive Back, the movie podcast where we imitate our favorite thing to do after a movie, which is to talk about it on the ride home. I'm Garrett, and of course, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Adrian.
Hello again.
And today, we thought we'd do a discussion for you guys. We haven't had a discussion on the podcast in a while. We've done a lot of movies reviews recently, which nothing wrong with that, but it's time to talk. So today we thought we'd bring up a very interesting topic, one that's pretty close to our hearts in how we look at film, and that's the level of and the inclusion and the attendance, for lack of a better word, of fun in film. So all this and more will be coming up on the drive back. So as we said, we're going to be discussing fun in film, whether or not it's important, if it's important to look at in terms of a review standpoint, if films have to be fun to be good, and probably the most important question I've been mulling over all day is, are critics missing the point with a lot of fun movies? I think that's a very real thing to be discussed. But let's go ahead and let's start out by talking about us and how we review film when we watch film. Do we think that fun is an important part of a movie?
Sure.
So I'll go ahead and bring it to you first, Adrian. When you watch a film, either for the podcast or for your own kind of casual viewing, how important is fun to you?
I think it's actually the number one thing. I've always kind of gone by, the reason I like film is because it's an escape for 1 to 3 hours, more closer to 3 hours now with the length of movies, but to me, I mean, there's some movies that don't meet any criteria for a good movie whatsoever, and I still enjoy them immensely. I think fun for me is number one.
Gotcha. I would argue pretty much the same. I think that fun is a very big part of it, but also for me, I've always talked about this X factor with film, and that's whether or not it's going to be remembered. And like a part of cinema history. Like we can talk about how good a movie like Sound of Metal is all day long, but if no one's going to remember it in 10 years, then what's the point, really? Which a big part of that comes down to having fun in the movie, at least for me personally. There's a lot of movies that I personally have a lot of positive feelings for that are not good films.
Same for me.
It kind of defines our guilty pleasures. We've talked about those before on the podcast. And one of the big ones I always think about is the 2019 Hellboy, the remake with David Harbour. It's not a good movie by any stretch, but I still have a lot of fun with it personally. So I was a fun, enjoyable experience in the theater. So I can't hold the movie accountable for or not fully accountable if it's not fun, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I've gone on record multiple times saying that I'm a huge fan of the Fast and Furious franchise, and I get people telling me all the time how they're all the same and they're all like just over the top and just ridiculous and not realistic. But no one ever says those aren't fun movies. You know why? Because they are a blast to watch. I don't care what you're looking for. If you put it on with no expectations, it is the most wild ride you could possibly go on. We'll do a franchise fever at some point on it, I'm sure, but yeah. I love them.
I'm actually looking forward to it. I have a couple people who listen to the podcast who are friends of mine that are looking forward to what I have to say about those movies. So that'll be a lot of fun. But let's kind of delve a little bit deeper. So when we review films here on the podcast, and even the films we have in our own collection and things like that, fun definitely plays a factor in how we review film. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. I think this podcast has probably made me look at movies a little more critically, just by the nature of actually reviewing a film. Mm-hmm. But I still would say that that's why my scores tend to kind of be more in the middle, because I just like film. I have a really hard time saying a movie is bad. Yeah. I've done it a couple times when it's just outright bad, but most of the time I find myself having enjoyed the last 2 hours, regardless of if the film's cinematography was 10 out of 10 or
Yeah.
whether the acting was 10 out of 10. So fun is probably the majority weight in my score, although critiques have gotten a little bit more weighted, but fun is still number one for me.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads into the next topic, really, is that, is fun, does a film have to be fun to be good? And I would say, honestly, no, a movie doesn't have to be fun to be an amazing film. I mean, the movies that come to mind are like Schindler's List and No Country for Old Men and,
Yeah,
films like that where they're not, No Country for Old Men is kind of a bad example because there is some fun moments,
sure.
in the tenseness of it. But like, yeah, Schindler's List especially kind of sticks out to me where it's not a fun movie at all.
Or
It's,
Shawshank Redemption.
it has its fun moments towards the end, like when he gets out of prison and things
Yeah,
like
I
that.
guess.
I'm just trying to think of movies that are like completely like just like there's nothing positive in that movie whatsoever.
Probably
Really.
like Boy in the Striped Pajamas, kind of similar
Yeah.
to Schindler's List. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm struggling to find good, not fun movies off the top of my head right now.
It's kind of hard because we kind of I don't know if it's subconscious where we only really remember the fun ones.
Well,
You know,
what would
you
you
know.
say about King's Speech?
It's been so long since I've seen it. I honestly can't.
But would that be classified as a good movie? I know it won a bunch of
Um,
awards, but when I watched it, I found it kind of like mundane, kind of just a little long and drawn out. But it won a ton of awards, and I don't think it's a fun movie.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen it, so I can't really say whether or not it's a good movie. Especially because the lines that we're looking at, or the lines we're looking at movies now by, and how we're critiquing film is different than how I viewed it 11 years ago.
100%, yeah.
So it's a little bit hard to kind of say. But I do remember there not being a whole lot of fun moments. It's more of an uplifting film, obviously, but it's not like
Sure.
fun. Um, I would even say Curious Case of Benjamin Button was that way too. It wasn't like all fun moments, especially towards the end when it got good. It was more serious and more dire, I guess.
But again, it still had its fun moments. So
Yeah.
I think there is an argument to be made. I would say, with exceptions, most movies have to be fun to some degree to be considered good and to go down in history as a good movie.
And maybe that kind of boils down to the fact that we kind of need something to make us feel better when we watch film, maybe subconsciously. Obviously, not everything makes us feel better. There are indie movies out there that are just devastating for the reason of being realistic or whatever.
Well, there you go. You could argue that Sound of Metal didn't have very many, if any, fun moments,
That's a very good point. Yeah,
but it's an amazing movie.
yeah,
So yeah, I think there are exceptions to the rule, but I think in general, fun is definitely a major component in the chemistry of a movie.
definitely. And I mean, it's one of the things that kind of leaning into the next topic, I guess. But like one of the things that I look for most in a movie, it's more so when I know the movie is going to be, something much different than your usual like King's Speech or The Fighter or Parasite, right? Like those are fun or good in their own right. But then when I go into a movie like, we're going to be doing Godzilla vs Kong real quick here. I know that movie is just fun for the sake of being fun, and I know
Yeah.
that I can distance myself from like, oh, okay, well, the movie was fun and all, but the plot, the characters just didn't quite line up to Shawshank or Citizen Kane, so it's a 4 out of 10 at the very best. Like I think that's a very dangerous and a very hazardous way of looking at film,
100% agree.
and kind of leans into the idea that you need to take every movie at face value and then you obviously dig it a little deeper afterwards. You can't compare a movie like Ready Player One or Godzilla vs Kong, or even, while they are more deeper films, like even the Avengers films, right? You can't really hold those to the same standard as Citizen Kane or Shawshank Redemption or The Godfather or anything like that are considered some of the best films of all time.
Yeah, and I think that's because those movies target something different. which is kind of what we're talking about. I think like it would be weird to even to do the reverse, to find a movie and then say, "Oh, but this isn't Avengers." And it's
Yeah,
like, "No, it's about the Holocaust."
yeah.
Like it's not going to be measured up the same way at all.
And that's the opposite of what we're trying to say, and that
Yeah.
also is hazardous too.
Yeah.
Like we've been trying to do on this podcast, you really have to diversify what you watch, and you can't just limit yourself.
And I think it's important, at least what I always try to do. I talk about it all the time. I don't look up reviews. I kind of got away from those when I was a lot younger. And my dad, when we would go see movies, he was kind of who introduced me to this whole movie lifestyle. And he started asking before we would see movies, well, what's the Rotten Tomatoes on it? Well, what's the Metacritic? And I found that I used to just stop telling him because he wouldn't want to go see a movie based on that review.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go see it and we would have a great time. And then I would tell him the review and he would find that review not true.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same way I used to do it. I used to go into movies like, I can't even give an example because there were so many, but it was like, okay, guys, here's the Rotten Tomatoes, here's the Metacritic. Let's see if they were right. That's how I used to watch movies, and that was very dangerous because you get into movies, movies that I liked that weren't regarded as very well, but I still thought I was like, the critics were wrong. This movie's a masterpiece, and a lot of those movies aren't really as good as I thought they were at the time. Now I'm kind of in the same boat as you. There are, obviously sometimes with social media you see reactions, you see.
I would say you're more on the pulse than I am.
Yeah,
you are much more aware of the rating that just came out.
Yeah, and I mean even you on like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever you're on, you'll see occasionally like, oh, I just saw this and it was awesome or it was bad.
Yeah.
Which it kind of, for me now, it doesn't temper my expectations. It sets my expectations going in. There's been a couple of films that we've done where I've gone in like, okay, this movie isn't regarded as very well, so if I give it a good score, I'm going to look like an idiot. Or the opposite. This movie's regarded in a very positive light, like Good Will Hunting. If I give it a negative score, I'm going to appear like an idiot. Which apparently, it's actually not regarded as high as a lot of people think it is. I found out the Metacritic score for Good Will Hunting is a 70, which is, I feel like it's a nice gap, because you have a lot of people on both sides of the spectrum, so 70 feels pretty accurate. But yeah, like, I will look at reviews after. And I don't know if you do this. I look at reviews after to see what people were listing as their critiques, what people were listing as their positives, to see whether or not I agreed or disagreed with them in a way that helps to then buffer my own review, if that makes sense. Like, if maybe it's something like, maybe I had a critique, I was like, oh, I really didn't like this, but no one was talking about it in any positive or negative light. Maybe I was putting too much emphasis on it.
But so do you tend... So I find that really interesting. Do you tend to evolve your... Does looking up the reviews after watching it change your opinion? Like, from when you walked out of the theater, then you go home and you read the review, and you had, say, that thing that you thought was a critique, but no one else critiqued it. Do you still hold that critique as an issue, or do you just drop it?
Most of the time, I still hold it.
Okay, good.
One of the biggest ones I can think of was Snyder Cut. A lot of people liked the way it looked. I hated it. So there's that. What, if anything more, what it does is it grows my own skill, I guess you could say. I'm not very skilled at movie reviewing just yet. We're all still learning. It grows my own skill by seeing what people are doing right or wrong.
Sure, I agree with that.
And reinforcing things that I should be looking for or things that I should not be looking at. Because, I mean, you and I, we don't have any film experience whatsoever. We haven't been in the film industry. We didn't do film schooling. I mean, except for making some videos.
Short films. Yeah, I've made short films before, but nothing, like, they were never submitted for anything or critiqued in any capacity.
And I've always tried to, like, do film blogs and things like that, and just kind of was a lack of drive. Now with the podcast and actually people who rely on what we say, it's a little bit more of a drive to do it.
Absolutely.
Getting back on the topic of fun and critiquing, here's the big topic. Do you think that critics with a lot of films, let's say, obviously I haven't seen any reviews for Godzilla versus Kong yet or anything like that. But let's take a film like Wonder Woman 1984, right? For example, do you think that critics, when they look at the film and they blast it or they tear it apart, that they miss a lot of the point and just can't see the fun aspect anymore because they want to appear as intelligent as possible? Maybe because that's the way I see it. I feel like a lot of critics try to appear as intelligent as possible, and oh well, his masterful use of the camera during these moments, and it's like, okay, that's great for a deeper discussion, but upon a first review, that's what I want to know. What is your first impression walking out? Did you have fun?
Yeah, I think Wonder Woman 1984 is a bad reference because that movie's not very fun.
I was just trying to think of something that was like a tentpole blockbuster film that was like more fun than deep.
I can't think of one of those off the top of my. Oh, I mean, I'll say this. This is kind of regarded as a universally bad movie, but the film Ender's Game. I don't think you've seen it, if I remember correctly. But that movie got panned pretty hard by critics all around because of the acting, because of the story, that it didn't adapt the book properly. My dad and I still both think that movie is so fun. Mm-hmm. And I do think that the critics missed that if you can kind of put aside those expectations and those critiques, it's a cool space movie. There's some fun parts to it. And yeah, so I do think that critics tend to lean on the more critical because that's how you become more famous as a critic. I think it's kind of one of those self-feeding circles where you have to be more negative because that's going to make you a top reviewer of a movie, and then you have to be more critical because you've come up being critical, and you kind of just lose that innocent sense that just comes when you first start reviewing.
Yeah, it's something I've started to see in the reviewing world, at least on YouTube. There are quite a few movie reviewers that I have grown very fond of, some very big ones, that have taken a more, I don't want to say overly critical, but they've taken this negative approach to some films that I haven't always agreed with, and I don't think it's in keeping with how I got interested in their channels to begin with.
Agreed.
But for the most part, I feel like they stay pretty true. Whereas a lot of the main critics, like people from like New York Times and Rolling Stone and things like that, I really don't understand how they continue to operate.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. Like, I'll use Fast and the Furious again, but if I'm gonna go see a Fast and the Furious movie, and I look up the reviews and they say, like, Vin Diesel's shirt doesn't look color graded properly, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard when you're talking about a scene where Vin Diesel's gonna fly into space in a car. Like, I think it's totally... Like, whenever I see reviews like that for any movie, even if it is like a very serious movie, when they talk about the color grading, and I know that's a big deal for the Snyder Cut because that's one of the first examples we've had of an A-B comparison. So that's a little bit different. But for most movies, whenever people dive into that very heavily, it kind of makes me just want to see it more because I know that that's the only thing they could critique.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of actually makes me lean the other way when someone's overly critical of just those minute details. It kind of makes me think this movie's probably pretty good. They just are focusing on this one thing.
But it also brings light upon this issue, and it's not just with film. It's with a lot of different things right now, where there's this focus that the negativity, the attacking of something, the bashing of something, the dragging it through the mud is the popular opinion, even if it's a good film. Like, it sickens me with the amount of content you see online where, like, like anti-Star Wars sequel stuff, or not. I mean, not that they're perfect.
That was going to be my next Yeah, that was my next topic.
But, like, I hate seeing all that kind of negativity because it's like this is how the industry dies. I feel.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you.
Because executives don't get the right message. The studios see all the negativity, so they try and change it up all the time, and fans don't like it. They don't, it's just a larger problem with everything.
Well, it happened, and not necessarily with movies, but it happened with Mass Effect. Mm-hmm. Mass Effect Andromeda came out, and that was supposed to be the start of another trilogy of games, and it got panned so hard that BioWare had to shut down that entire division
Yeah.
because the community went too far. And speaking of Star Wars, I really enjoy The Rise of Skywalker. Again, the keyword being fun. I think it's a pretty fun movie. There's a lot of really big spectacle. There's a lot of really big scenes. I think it's fun.
The
When
keyword
the
is also
internet,
enjoy too.
yeah,
Yeah.
but and then when the whole internet panned it, I really started to lose faith in what the community of film was pushing for.
Specifically, the community of
Very
Star Wars
dangerous.
at that point.
Yeah, but now it's spread, I feel, to a lot of things. I'm actually
Yeah.
nervous for Black Widow to come out because I feel that we are in this era of, if it's not exactly what the fan theory I wanted it to be, I'm gonna hate this movie.
Yeah. I'm not so much scared for Black Widow. I'm more scared for Spider-Man 3.
Yeah, because everyone's expectations are so crazy.
Everyone's expecting Maguire and Garfield to show up, and if they don't, then Marvel's gonna have a riot on their hands.
Absolutely.
It that's a larger problem we'll have to address on another episode of the podcast. I think that's actually a very good topic to have a more deeper discussion on.
Yeah.
Because it is a very large issue. I mean, we saw it with The Last Jedi was the first real big one, where the fan upheaval, because the critic rating of Last Jedi is the highest of any of the Star Wars movies, except for maybe Empire.
But we've talked about this slightly before, but it's actually self-contained. It's a great sci-fi movie. Mm-hmm. It's just the fact that it had Star Wars stuff in it that people just hated 100%.
And that's also an episode that I'm not looking forward to doing is the sequel defense stuff.
But I do think it ties in just in general to the fun topic, because I feel that as a community, the film community specifically has lost interest in having fun. I feel that the fun has now come from picking movies apart.
I'm interested. Yeah, I would actually disagree, because I feel like a lot of people, especially fans, when they enjoy something, they make themselves heard. And honestly, fans enjoy things a lot more than we give them credit for.
That's true.
Like Godzilla King of the Monsters is the big one, where it came out, critics give it like a 54% or something like that.
Great
movie. The fans came out and the fans loved it. And because it was showing more of what they wanted. Granted, the 2014 Godzilla is another great film. I think it's a fantastic film. But it didn't give enough of the monsters, so the sequel gave, obviously, more of that.
All of them, yeah.
And it sounds like Godzilla vs. Kong is going to be even more, so it's going to be fantastic, apparently. So fans... I think the problem comes down to the tentpole popular online presences, whether it's critics or people in the industry or influencers related to film. They're the ones whose voices are heard the loudest, and that is the problem, because a lot of them are the negative voices.
Yeah.
You don't get a lot of the fan voices that come through that are positive, unless there's some sort of restore the Snyder Cut following.
Yeah.
So...
But I think something that happens quite a bit is I'll go see a movie at a midnight premiere. I haven't this year, obviously, but when I used to go to midnight premieres when everything was open, I would come back to work the next day or something, and I would say, "Oh my gosh, it's so good." And they would go, "Oh, really? I heard this." And they would say something negative about the movie, and it's a shame that they've only heard that and not all the great things that are also in the movie.
Yeah.
It's almost like Yelp, to be honest, where you're more inclined to leave a review if you had a negative experience. And I think that's the case with film and conveying information. Most people talk more about a movie if it's terrible than they do talk about the positives.
I would say it's both sides. You get a lot of people talking about when a movie's bad, but you also get a lot of people talking if a movie's good. Like, think Parasite.
That spread like wildfire. Yeah.
Also, it's kind of maybe a bad example, but like Borat 2 was also getting really hyped up. So there's two sides of the coin on that one. You just don't get a lot of the middle, because I know like what you're saying when people are like, "Oh, I heard that it was X," or "I heard this," right? That's why I just don't tell people what I thought immediately anymore until they ask me.
Exactly.
Because I'll be like, "Oh yeah, I just went and saw getting out of focus there. I went and saw X movie this weekend, and I enjoyed it." And they're like, "Oh, well, I heard it was bad." And it's like, "Well, did you actually see it?"
That's my
then
whole thing, is go
yeah.
see the movie.
And like, well, I'm getting to the point now. I won't even tell people if I enjoyed it or not. Be like, yeah, I went and saw Godzilla. Okay, cool. Well, what did you think? I'm not going to think the same thing you did.
Yeah.
You should go see it. And I'm not saying you should go see it because I think it's good. I'm thinking you should go see it to make it up for yourself.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that if you're at all inclined on how a movie is, like, this is so weird to say because we're a movie review podcast, but you need to go see it. There's just something that's so lost when someone tells you something. And I've talked to so many people about some of the best movies that I've ever seen. And they'll go, yeah, I just don't think I'm going to see it. I heard this happens. And you're like, you don't even know how that ties into the whole movie because you were just told about one probably minute-long scene in a 3-hour film.
Exactly.
And that's just so disheartening for me. And it's happening like wildfire. It's happening everywhere. And that's where I to circle all the way back, I feel like a lot of the not diehard movie community, like the people that are just kind of dipping their toes, have lost that fun aspect. It's more like, I only want to see what's good. And if there's any inclination that it's bad, I'm just not going to see it because it's a waste of my time. And that's really not good.
Yeah, it almost feels harder and harder to recommend movies now because everyone's taste is so different. But the one point I was going to make is that when a lot of people ask, oh, I heard this about it, I heard it was bad, I heard it was good, and they're not making a decision for themselves, they're not going to go see it, it's usually new releases. It's usually things that were in theater that just released and they have to pay money to see it.
Yeah.
That part I understand. Is it worth $15 or whatever the movie price is? Maybe. I can't tell you if you're going to like
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
But if it's like, if I'm talking to someone like, oh, I just watched Lawrence of Arabia this weekend, and right, and they're like, oh, well, I've never heard of that one. Like, well, guess what? It's on your Netflix account, so it's free for you. Just watch it, like, or or any movie that's released. Like if you have HBO Max, you're probably going to watch Godzilla vs. Kong or Judas and the Black Messiah or The Little Things or any of those movies that come out because they're free. Like,
if you have HBO Max,
those are a lot. Yeah, exactly. Those are easier to recommend than a movie that is paid for, a release. If that makes sense.
I completely get what you're saying, but it's just, I think I still stick to my guns on the fact that, like, I have witnessed people go see a different movie because they heard one negative thing about one movie and nothing about the other.
Yeah.
So they'll go choose the one that they know nothing about versus the one that they were interested in, but heard something slightly negative about.
Exactly.
And the times I've heard something negative about a movie that I ended up loving is so astronomical that I can't even count how many times that's happened. And that's why I completely agree with you. Unless someone directly asks me for details on my thoughts or seeks this podcast out to listen to my thoughts, I let them lead that conversation and what they want to know. Yeah. Because I don't want to steer one way or the other, and I don't want to ruin someone's experience or take away the chance to have a great experience.
Exactly. And that's kind of what we structure our reviews on. We do more of a casual discussion. We talk about the movie, what we liked and what we didn't like. It's not so much a review as much as is discussing the film, talking about it on the way home from the movie theater, the entire premise of the show. So that's why, I mean, like, for us, that's the important part. Like, for a lot of the new release movies, you've already decided a lot of people have decided if they're going to go see it or not. Yeah. And the ones that are on the fence are going to look to reviews, and I hope that you would look at ours in the first 5 minutes when we talk about it spoiler-free and talk about whether we think it's worth it or not. And then if you're like, you know what, no, I'm not going to go see it, then continue listening to reviews and reading reviews and watching YouTube videos or whatever, and maybe you'll change your mind.
Yeah. And I think it's important to also, we talked about it at the beginning, but I think our review in particular, while we do talk about some of the more nuanced details of movies and movie criticisms, the main thing we're reviewing is it worth watching in general, which is a large component is the fun. That is a big part of it. So any of the movies that we've recommended, they're fun movies. And regardless of how much you want to pick them apart, we believe that they're worth watching because we don't feel you'll waste your time. Yeah. You will have fun after you've finished.
Exactly. Bringing it full circle. Having fun. Which honestly, for us, is the most important part. I mean, while a movie doesn't have to be fun to be good, having fun is important. I feel like that's the best way to kind of sum up what we've talked about.
I completely agree. Yeah, if you're not having fun watching a movie, I think that's the biggest sign that you've made a mistake.
Either that, or you're watching an indie film, or something that's just designed to make you.
Yeah, or again, one of those outliers that do exist. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like even then, watching those movies, you're still aware of how good it is, quote unquote.
Yeah.
If you're not having fun, you still have to be. You will definitely have that little voice in your head going, "This is a very good movie."
Yeah.
And if both of those things aren't happening, that's probably a misstep.
And you're going to get to the point where even movies that aren't fun, like Schindler's List, you will have fun in finding the things that make it good. The camera work, the cinematography, the visual effects, the plot, the characters, any of that kind of stuff can bring you fun in identifying. And that's really why we're here and why we're doing what we're doing. So,
yeah.
But yeah.
But if none of those little bells are ringing, that this is, if you're just sitting there and going like, I don't know what's going on in this movie, I don't know, this isn't good, I don't care. That's a sign that's not for you. And you should probably look for a movie that's a different genre, or maybe just trying to change direction a little bit, because movies should be fun. Mm-hmm. They're designed to be fun, and if they're not, then something's wrong.
If they're not, then you're watching Artemis Fowl.
Still, hey, to be fair, we have had a lot of fun stemming from that movie.
Making fun of it, not the movie itself.
Fun is fun.
Okay, Righteous Kill then. We'll say that.
Well, that's why I gave it like a 6 or whatever. That's a terrible movie.
Oh man, but that's going to bring us to an end for this discussion. Obviously, we'll probably talk about critique and the hate kind of speech, or not speech, but like the negative outlook a lot of social media and websites have brought us. But speaking of film reviews, we wanted to go ahead and share really quickly that after some back and forth discussion with Adrian and I here, we will no longer be doing now streamings or now showings on the podcast. The issue with it is that we cannot get, with the way that our episodes come out, they're either a week or 2 weeks behind. So basically, we're recording this on March 31st, and this may not be out for a week or two.
Middle of April, yeah.
Exactly. So the problem is when we watch a movie like Godzilla vs. Kong, which comes out this week, it's available today on HBO. My theaters are going to start showing it on Friday, so I'll go see it then. We'd probably record a review for it on Monday, and it would be out in 2 weeks, which is already halfway through its HBO runtime, and it's going to be in theaters for 2 weeks at that point. So what we're going to be doing instead is we're going to be watching the movies as quick as we can, as soon as we are allowed to. We don't have press passes or anything like that. We don't get advanced screenings, unfortunately.
We're regular people just like you.
Like you, and that's what makes us special. But since we are limited to that, we'll be watching the movies as soon as we are able to, and then either individually, either just me or just Adrian or the both of us, will post a spoiler-free review as soon as possible on our YouTube channel, for sure. So make sure you go to our YouTube channel and subscribe to make sure you're following for that. But also, we may post it on the podcast as well. We have to discuss that. And then at a later point, we'll talk a spoiler discussion.
Yeah.
About the film. I think that replacing now streamings and now showings with, a more deeper discussion of spoilers is a better option. And having those initial reviews of should you go see it or should you not, and what did we think without spoilers, is going to be better.
100%.
But that also is going to lead us into creating more content for the YouTube channel. At some point we would like to do lists, similar to a lot of the other bigger YouTube channels that are out there. I would love to start doing some video essays. I'm sure you would as well. Talking about some of your favorite films and things like that.
Give you guys a walkthrough of this bad boy right here.
There you go. And at some point, hopefully sometime soon, we'll be doing walkthroughs of our own movie collections here at home. So be on the lookout for that. But other than that, that brings us to the end. No other kind of announcements or things to talk about, really. So, Adrian, this is a little different, but we usually like to say something, right?
We do, but this time it is going to be a little different. Is go watch a movie, but make sure that you're having fun.
Yeah.
That's obviously I'm hounding home the point of this episode, but just to reiterate, if if you're finding this movie journey that you've started or that you're continuing, and you feel like you're not having fun, that's not right. You might need to just kind of either adjust your expectations or just let yourself have a good time. That's the most important thing, is making sure that you come off of watching a movie feeling like your time was valued and that you had a good time. Maybe you had a couple laughs, or maybe you saw a cool action scene. But fun is the number one component for both of us, and it's reflected in all of our reviews, and we hope that you take it as such.
Absolutely. So with that, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Make sure you follow us on any podcasting app. Like, subscribe, and comment. Turn on that bell for notifications. And we will see you guys next week on The Drive Back. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Drive Back. Make sure to be on the lookout for new episodes every Monday, and make sure to follow us on social media.